on 9/11. My wife and I and lots of other people were there. We happened to be in New York at that point, and I want to share some of the feelings, some of the things that went on at that event that hopefully will never happen again. I am going to pass around this box in a couple of pieces that you can take a quick look at and then pass on to the next people. They are items that related to World Trade Center. The epaulets here were done for soldiers in the and officers in the Greater New York Division to honor those who had died plus those who were serving as helping in the relief efforts. Flags were common, and I don't remember exactly when that one was given to me, but it's one that I had saved for some reason. There are a couple of pins there, and there's the final badge that I had for my work as part of the command for the operations. Some of you will know that there is a timeline for the September 11th attacks. We always met in our finance council. I was on divisional headquarters as the assistant financial secretary then. Always met on Tuesdays at 8:30 a.m. We came in, skies were beautiful, temperatures were great, sat down at our meeting at 8:30 in the boardroom up on the 8th floor, facing 14th Street. We were on West 14th Street, and we started our meeting. I was the secretary who read the different items, and then there was discussion, and I recorded the decisions. Everything went well until about 20 minutes into the meeting. And there was a knock at the door, and we answered it. And somebody from the 8th floor came to tell us that a plane had flown into one of the World Trade Center towers. The rumors then were that it was a small plane, but all of us decided, since we could see out the back windows where our IT department was to the tower, that we would go back and take a look. And we did. And I remember the gash in the tower, and I remember thinking to myself, doesn't look like a small plane. There was a terrible gash. None of the plane showed. I figured it had to be something bigger. But we went back to our meeting, a few more items that we did, and then shortly after 9, another knock at the door. Another plane has crashed into the other tower. The chairman of the meeting, our divisional commander, said, "Are there any items here that we need to discuss?" Nobody said anything about needing to discuss any of them. All of them were approved, and we immediately went to a time of prayer. And I remember those prayers were for those who were trapped in the towers. They were there for the people who were responding at that point, the fire, the policemen. And somebody's prayer was a prayer of, why in the world would somebody hate enough to destroy or try to destroy so many lives? So that was the start of a busy day. One of the officers who was at the corps that we attended, as people on divisional headquarters, we choose a corps to attend as our church home, plus where we do our local service and connect with the local congregation. He happened to be down there on 9/11 and 9/14, and he took a few pictures. So these are some of the pictures that I just discovered recently that I had on this disc that he gave me, and I hadn't looked at actually ever. And so I decided I would take a look to remind myself of what those who were going down to the World Trade Center to assist were seeing. And again, these pictures were taken on 9/12, the day after, by this Salvation Army officer on site. You can see the fire truck, and if you notice, it's been burned. There was equipment that was lost. The Salvation Army, actually our emergency, not a canteen, but the head of the emergency disaster team was down there. Now, if he hadn't moved his car when he did, his car would have also been lost. Unfortunately, he knew a lot of the firemen and policemen, and so the impact on it was so intense, as you can imagine, with several friends dying, that he really was not able to complete all of his duties at that point. He really needed to step back. And so the headquarters, we took over. Now, there's another picture. You'll remember that it was not just the towers, but also the size of them. They crashed into other buildings. These are some of the pictures of missing persons that sprung up early. These were in many places. The closest to where our headquarters was St. Vincent's Hospital, which was just around the block and another block down. There was a visitor that we had who came from our international headquarters, and I sat in the room where we made all our decisions in the command center, and I was available, and they said, would you take him around the corner? You could still see the smoke and everything rising from the towers, and there on St. Vincent's Hospital were some plywood boards that had been placed on the brick wall, and there were a number of people's pictures posted, usually with names. If you see this person, please call. And these we started to pop up all over New York. And in a sense, they became not only, if you find this person, let me know, because they're my family member or a good friend, but also people would start to leave flowers and other things in memorial. First day was one where there was so little known of what in the world was really going on. You can imagine all of a sudden discovering that the world you knew was attacked. And subways stopped in Manhattan, and most people were fleeing, often walking, to get out of the city, and the services, ambulances, fire trucks, police cars were rushing down to get into the area. So there were all kinds of rumors going around. Out the window of my office, I could see the Empire State Building. The fear was, well, they attacked the other towers. That's another symbol of New York and of the United States. They may attack it. There was a rumor that in Albany, New York, they were afraid because they have a nice government landscape there with some modern structures, that maybe they would be hit. I remember that people in Chicago thinking they might be a target. The reality is nobody knew what could be a target. And everything, of course, stopped in a sense for very many people. I remember the day had gone on. We had basically gotten canteens into place, volunteers down to serve those who were there, and it was atrocious. But at 8 o'clock, we pretty much had everything under control. So I had a choice to make. Was I going to stay there? And another decision, I lived in Hartsdale, could I get home if I wanted to? I had a car in the garage, but pretty much by then, West Side Highway and many other major roads were not being used except for getting emergency disaster people to the site. So I made a decision, I'm gonna go home, so I get some rest and I have a clearer idea of what's going on. Of these people who might spend all night doing it, it's good to have a clear head at the table. And so I walked from there, and as I was walking along, I walked over by Union Square, and there were all kinds of people, candles, and there was somebody on the corner giving out little red, white, and blue symbols of America, giving these out to people to pin on. And so on that first night of 9/11, I had one of these, and as I got badges and things, I would change and put it on them. Again, some more pictures of the disaster, the numbers of people that were there. You see also all the windows blown out of a lot of other buildings. There's the Millennium Hilton, which again you can see the disaster, the mess that it is. And the bottom picture in the right corner was taken on 9/18. And you'll notice that there was dust everywhere, even several days afterwards. One of the things about it is that as the towers came down, of course, they started to break up all kinds of things and send it out into the air. I remember I'd gone back to my office and I was working on those things I had to finalize from the agenda of the meeting. As soon as I was done, I went back into the command center and I heard a loud moan out in the hallway. The tower is collapsing. And so I ran from the room back to the 8th floor IT area, looked out, and watched as the one tower pancaked down, imploding right before my very eyes. That was something that I will never forget. And your mind thinks different things. My mind thought, and I don't know whether it's good or bad, but my mind thought, thank goodness that the tower didn't fall over and destroy more of Lower Manhattan than it already had. And then on the other hand, I also said, and there were people trapped above who had no way of getting out because a lot of the stairways were destroyed in the one tower, and fire was going up from where the planes were. Remember, the planes were ones that were destined for way out west because they would have a lot of fuel on them. And if you remember the picture of the plane crashing, the second plane crashing in, you saw a huge explosion of flame and fire that showed up. So I thought to myself, those poor people who are stuck up on those upper levels, it's almost a relief for them to be quickly put out of their misery because there was no way they were going to get out of there. You'll remember that some people decided to jump and probably was less painful than staying there and being burned alive. Again, here's some more destruction on 9/12, and on 9/15, this picture on the left still shows all the dust and all the smoke that existed and continued to go on the pile for quite a while. There was a Roman Catholic church, Church of St. Peter, that was very close to the World Trade Center, however, had not been destroyed. And it became one of the first places where a lot of the supplies that were used for providing drinks and food to the people who were responding were gathered. It's the oldest church, oldest Catholic church in New York. There's another church very close to this that also, even though it was so close, no windows broke, and those who were in helping found it as a place of relief. This is a same picture later in the day of one of the canteens with all those supplies in the background. This is looking the next day at all the supplies that were piled up. And this was the interior of the church, where those things that were being donated initially were going here. Now, some of our people in the Salvation Army and other divisions thought it would be great to promote canned goods and water, etc., being collected, and these great caravans coming into New York with these supplies. Not a good idea, because we don't have warehouses sitting with empty shelves or empty areas to receive them, plus them getting in and out of the city is not easy. And so after this, those who were involved in disaster services really turned to the point of discouraging people from doing those kinds of drives, so that we were not having to use volunteers and a lot of time processing donations. Ghost stations. If you look here, these are maps of the New York City subway system in Lower Manhattan. And at some point shortly after 9/11, a new map came out. This map eliminated all the stations that used to be there by the World Trade Center, either because they had been destroyed, some of them, or there were not people that should be entering them at that point. And so they called them ghost stations. And my first encounter with ghost stations and by the way, these are all the trains where the World Trade Center was, and then you can see there's none of them. They ended up using some of the ones that were away from there, but they knocked out all these stations there. And they were called ghost stations. A few days after we had started to meet people's needs, there was a building down in the financial center, a smaller building, and one of the floors was made available for groups like the Salvation Army who were providing aid to people. A lot of them in that immediate area. Some of them had been displaced or again didn't have access to all the resources they usually would have. So I was sent with several $100s, and the easiest way to get there was to get on the subway, go down, get off at the closest stop. And that was my experience of having gone through one of the ghost stations. Eerie, kind of an eerie experience, because you know that above there's all kinds of destruction, people have died, and yet you're going through here, getting away from the area. Now, badges tell a story. The first badge we had was one that was done quickly. You can see them at the top. Nobody anticipated a disaster that would be so large and would require so many name tags. So that what happened is we had a very talented person down in our printing and graphics department on our divisional headquarters who decided that he would come up with a very simple badge that we could give to people. At that point, we were writing in our names, what we were, signing it and getting it signed off by one of the people in the command center. This one was the first one. The picture there is taken from my license at that point. Now, I never knew it, but it is illegal, at least it was in New York, to use a license picture on anything else. But when emergencies come, you don't worry about some of those rules. And so we were using the picture. He would take your license, he would then clip out the picture, put it on this card, we'd get the signatures, and it would be laminated. And this one expired 9/22. Now, in our minds, we knew that 9/22, there's no way that the disaster would be over. What happened is, there were so many volunteers and so many people that they started to become concerned. Some of these people may not have been attached to any kind of organization, and so nobody had almost any records on them. So on the night before a new card ID was required, we had to produce new ones. I picked the color because it was so much different than what we had. Again, basic format, but now they were printed with our names and what our position was, and again signed off by the volunteer and also somebody from the command center. The night before these were required, and we were strongly told that there needed to be new documentation for all people who are our volunteers. A couple of men came in who wanted a badge. However, they had no connection that they could prove or that we knew of to the Salvation Army's efforts. Earlier, a few days before that, I came into our headquarters one day, and lo and behold, I discovered this smartly dressed man and woman who were sitting in the reception area, greeting people, directing them to the right place. And they were busy talking to somebody. I went up to the command area and I asked, who are those people down there? Their uniforms were a little bit different. And what I found out is those were a couple who had planned a trip to New York City. They worked for the Royals in UK. They actually had worked with Diana and her kids in the castle, which I can't remember the name of it, that they were in. Windsor Castle. They had felt that they wanted to come and be helpful in spite of the disaster. So they came as soon as flights were available. They had to go and ask the Queen whether they could do it or not. She gave them the authority and said, yes, go. They were Salvation Army people, Salvation Army soldiers, and so they came. They were good at handling people. I guess if you work for the Royals, you probably have very good people skills. But their people skills were not working on these two men. And so there was a call up to the command center and saying, we have two men here who are insisting on being given badges, and we have no connection to us that we know of, and so they sent me down. And I don't think I'm a forceful person. However, I did tell them that there was no way. The government was now insisting that there be new identification for everybody, and the organizations doing it had to vet for those people. They were very unhappy, very unhappy. However, they left. And we went to London a little while later. I found out that one of the gentlemen who got us into the Lords, the library of the Lords in the official government buildings, was a Salvationist. His kids were the couple that had come and were sitting in the lobby, and they apparently thought I was some fierce something or another in being able to deal with them. So that was the move to this one. Then we started to get a little bit more in sync with what we should have had from the beginning. This was the third badge. However, it has no expiration date on it, which isn't good, because who knows who has it, how long, and how long it's good for. And one of the problems that our territory had is in other places, other territories, they had a emergency disaster service office at their THQ, their territorial headquarters. Guess what? The Eastern Territory didn't have one. What should have happened, if that had been in place, which would happen in other divisions, is that immediately the local folks would start to do the operations, and then within a day or two, this team would come in, trained team, and they would take over. However, since we didn't have one, it went on for several days that the leadership of the Greater New York Division had to do this. So when we finally got the right people in and they established a actual command center in another portion of the building and the duties went over to them, they had a machine that made beautiful plastic name tags, identifications that would be used. However, because it had no date on it, there came a point where they said every ID that we see has to have an expiration date on it. And as you passed around those materials, you will see the final badge, which had an expiration date of 4/11/03. And that was the last badge. It was not too long after that the command center was able to close down. Our other services to people continued for a few more years, counseling, providing food, helping people with rental vouchers, etc., etc. One of the things I passed around was a leaflet produced by the Greater New York Division that talked about Operation Compassion Under Fire. That was the name that we gave to the work that was being done by the Salvation Army pertaining to the World Trade Center. As of late October, 20 canteens had served over 2 billion meals. These were mostly down around the disaster site. However, they also were placed at places where the Salvation Army and other agencies were providing relief to people. Those places moved. I told you I had to take a lot of money to the place in Lower Manhattan in the financial district. From there, they moved to a pier on the west side, on the Hudson River, and set up booths and areas for all the agencies so that families could come and have a one-stop place to go for the assistance that they needed. They also were nice. They had some massage people that would massage folks to help them to relax. There were counselors. There were people who could help with rent, people who could help with other issues that people were suffering from. My wife was there. And I remember her coming home one day and saying to me, there was a family that came in and they were concerned and sure that their family member had died in the World Trade Center. And they came back a while later. You know what they discovered? Their relative was in the Caribbean. She'd gone on vacation, told nobody, apparently didn't see anything about what had happened in New York, and so they were worrying all this time when she was sound and alive and very, very safe. So if you're going on vacation, tell some of your family where you're going so they don't worry about you if there's some kind of disaster. We had almost 4,000 volunteers who had served. This was as of late October, a month or so after the attack on the World Trade Center. And grief and spiritual counseling had been given to thousands of relief workers and their families. This, by the way, was the newsletter, or the news that went out from Greater New York headquarters. And again, it was passed around. I took this because it gives so many different scenes of what went on that day. And that, folks, is all my spiel at this point and all the pictures. I'm open to questions. Yes?
Glenn, thank